They say a man's land is his kingdom. What they don't tell you is that sometimes your kingdom is under siege by a blonde bobbed, pearl necklace-wearing menace who thinks her HOA bylaws supersede God and the deed to your property. I had just finished the spring-tilling soil. A rich, dark brown, turned over like a freshly baked cake, smelling of earth and promise when I saw it. A gleaming white luxury SUV. The kind that costs more than my whole tractor fleet. Parked right in the middle of my future soybean crop. It was like a giant, entitled white smudge on my hard work. A personal insult delivered on 4 all-season radials. My heart. It just stopped for a second, then started hammering with a slow, furious rhythm. She had done it again. How could she be so audacious? So disconnected from the very ground beneath her feet. I could feel a low hum in my ears. A vibration that had nothing to do with the tractor engine I'd just shut off. It was the sound of my patience finally. Irrevocably. Snapping. My family has worked this land for 5 generations. We've weathered droughts and floods, recessions and pandemics. All with the unshakable belief that this soil, this piece of earth, would provide. We learned to respect its boundaries, its seasons, its moods. Karen, on the other hand, had moved into the new exclusive subdivision on the hill overlooking our farm just 2 years ago. She was the self-appointed head of the local HOA, a title she wore like a crown of thorns. Not for herself, but for everyone else. She'd already tried to find me for my unsightly hay bales, my inappropriate farm equipment, and even for the sound of my rooster at dawn. Each time, I'd calmly, legally, and exhaustively explained that her jurisdiction ended exactly where my property began, a fact clearly marked by a 100-year-old stone wall. She never seemed to get it. Or, more likely, she just didn't care. This time, it was different. This wasn't a phone call or a passive-aggressive email. This was an act of war, a brazen declaration of her perceived superiority, of her belief that her convenience was more important than my livelihood. I stood there, taking a slow, deep breath, the dust of the field filling my lungs, smelling of all the work I'd just completed, my hands clenched into fists, the knuckles turning white. No, I wasn't going to call her. I wasn't going to talk. I was going to act. I walked back to my tractor, the old diesel engine still ticking as it cooled down, a sound I found deeply comforting. This time, it wasn't for tilling. It was for building. A man with a tractor and a righteous indignation is a force of nature. I backed the tractor up to my barn, hooked up the post hole digger, then a flatbed trailer loaded with heavy, pressure-treated lumber and rolls of barbed wire. I worked through the afternoon, the sun beating down on my back, the roar of the engine a steady counterpoint to the quiet rage that had settled deep in my bones. Every post I set was a definitive no. Every length of wire I strung was a sharp, clear stay out. I was building more than a fence. I was building a boundary, a statement, a monument to the sanctity of my land. Myron, are you sure about this? Jenna's voice was a soft counterpoint to the distant hum of my tractor. She was my niece, a law student who had come to the farm for a summer break, and she was watching my silent, furious construction with a worried expression. It just seems a little extreme. Myron, our family's oldest friend and the unofficial historian of this valley, tapped a gnarled finger on the book. Extreme. The woman drove her car onto his seedbed. Girl, he's just securing his border. Besides, he said, his eyes twinkling a little, he's well within his rights. See here. He pointed to a faint, hand-drawn map in the book, dated 1923. This is the original property line. The one everyone forgets about. The one that runs a good 20 feet past the old stone wall. Jenna's eyes widened. Wait. So, her house is technically on his property. Myron let out a dry, rattling chuckle. Not quite, but her brand new, manicured front yard. The one she's so proud of. It extends a full 5 feet onto his land. And that little access road she uses to park her car, that's entirely on his property. It was all laid out wrong when they developed that subdivision. They ignored the old survey markers. Myron's revelation was the kind of twist you only find in dusty old books and small-town gossip. It was the kind of truth that shifts the entire world on its axis. He had been a land surveyor back in his day, and he'd always kept meticulous records. He explained that a modern surveyor, working from faulty maps, had mistakenly laid out the new subdivision, encroaching slightly but significantly on my farm's buffer zone. It had been a small oversight then, but now, with Karen's repeated provocations, it was a weapon. The quiet hum of my tractor had been a prelude to a much larger, more explosive confrontation. This is ridiculous. I can't believe he did this. He has my car trapped. I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the news. She screeched into her phone. Her voice, thin and piercing, cut through the peaceful morning air, startling the birds. I walked out of my house, coffee mug in hand, the steam curling up into the cool air. I leaned against my front porch railing, took a slow sip, and just watched her. A small smile played on my lips. Are you just going to stand there? She bellowed, her face turning a blotchy red. Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost me? I have a meeting in the city. I took another sip of my coffee. Looks like you have a little problem there. Karen, I said, my voice calm and low. A parking problem. That set her off. She stormed toward me, a flurry of expensive fabric and sputtering anger. This is private property. You can't just build a fence like this. It's a violation of my rights. Your rights. I laughed. A deep, rumbling sound. You're standing on my property, yelling at me about your rights. The irony is just exquisite. Jenna and Myron, who had been watching from inside, came out onto the porch. Jenna held the old leather book. We have the original survey records, Jenna said, her voice quiet but firm. It shows that your front lawn and the access road you've been using actually falls within the historical boundary of this farm. We can show you the markers. Karen's face went from red to a ghostly white. The bluster, the arrogance, it all just seemed to deflate. That's not possible, she stammered. The new survey, the developer said. The developer made a mistake, Myron said, his voice a gentle but unyielding force. And you, Karen, have been trespassing for 2 years. This fence, built on my family's land, is not a violation of your rights. It's the restoration of ours. Karen looked from my unyielding face to the fence, then to Jenna and Myron. The reality of the situation hit her like a punch to the gut. The power she'd wielded, the little kingdom she'd built for herself on the hill, was not as secure as she thought. Her car, her symbol of status and mobility, was now a pathetic prisoner of her own making, surrounded by my unmoving timber and barbed wire. The shrill demands had died down, replaced by a quiet, desperate plea. What am I supposed to do? She whispered. I walked over to the fence, pulling a large, heavy padlock from my pocket. You're going to call a tow truck, I said, my voice all business now. You're going to pay for the damage to my tilled field, and you're going to pay for the surveying and legal fees to get your property lines straightened out. Then, and only then, I will move this fence. The victory wasn't sweet. It was tired. It was the feeling of a battle won, but one that should never have been fought. Karen, the bully, the self-proclaimed authority, was now nothing more than a woman with a car problem and a shattered illusion of power. The air was filled with the silence of her defeat. The only sound the distant rustle of the trees in the wind. She stared at the padlock, her eyes welling up with tears of frustration and humiliation. It was a sight I never thought I'd see. The story spread like wildfire through the valley. The other neighbors, who had also suffered under Karen's rule, came by to quietly offer support, bringing pies and words of thanks. The new fence, once a symbol of anger, became a testament to standing one's ground. It became a story told over coffee at the diner. A legend whispered among the younger kids about the farmer who outsmarted the HOA queen. We didn't hate her. We just needed her to understand. To understand that our quiet way of life, Our traditions and our land were not something to be trampled on. They were the very things that held this community together. When is a fence just a fence? And when is it a statement? Was what I did an act of a petty man taking revenge? Or a man of principle finally standing up for his home? The line between right and wrong can often feel like a freshly tilled field. And sometimes, you just have to make your own boundary clear. What do you think?